Hi everyone. Slightly different video this week as we get closer to the exams. I'm going to do an unseen poetry video to give you a little bit of support with that. But unlike the other ones with Blake and the Tempest, it's not going to be kind of a prepared PowerPoint with lots of knowledge stuff on there. It's going to be about practicing skills. So I was thinking about the best way to do this, and I think I'll just start with a reminder of what you've got to do. So unseen poetry is something you've done before. You've done it at GCSE, and it's something that hopefully get the idea of. Um, in terms of the marking, you are only being marked on AO1 and AO2. You're not expected to know anything about the poet or really to bring in anything that you might know or guess about context or critics. It's a pure test of your skills of interpretation and analysis, because those two words, interpretation and analysis, in a broad sense, that's what AO1 and AO2 means, isn't it? What is this poem about, and how did this poem achieve its goals through, methods and language and stuff like that? So I thought the best way to do this might be to just model what it looks like to go from seeing a poem for the first time and then kind of coming to an understanding of it. Your question will always be really simple and unhelpful, because it will just be analyze this poem, and it can be any poem from the 16th century, probably Shakespeare's time, right up until the modern day. So I was thinking, actually, one thing that might be useful for you to watch in a video is if I model through what it might be like to see a poem for the first time and come to an understanding of it. So I was trying to think of, how do I do that where it's a genuine unseen poem for me, and I'm not kind of preparing things beforehand or kind of bringing in things that I already know. And then it struck me that the results of the National Poetry Competition for 2026 came out a week or two ago, and I read the winning poem, and I talked to some of my friends about it, because most of my friends are into poetry, and one of my friends said to me that the runner-up poem was really good, and my friend's opinion really was that the runner-up poem should have won it. I didn't read the runner-up poem, so it strikes me, if I go to the National Poetry Competition's website, here we've got 2025 National Poetry Competition winners have now been announced. First prize, I have read that poem. Second prize, Damien O'Brien, Axe. I haven't read it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this poem and genuinely look at it for the first time. And then I'm going to open up this Word document where it says analyse this poem. And I'm going to just do a little bit of a plan, model through what my first 5 minutes of thinking might be, model through what my essay plan might be. And then if I'm feeling particularly confident, I might even write an introduction or a paragraph on that, but we'll see how that goes. So I've genuinely no idea what this poem is going to look like or be like. Okay, here we go. Damien O'Brien, Axe. Okay, so Axe by Damien O'Brien. First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to read it so that you're not just sitting watching me silently read it. I'm going to read it out loud, so that's going to probably be a little model of what will be happening inside your head when you open up that exam paper. Axe, Damien O'Brien. An axe is an axe to another axe. Earth balances on the wedge of an axe and its weight presses down. The future is kindling. There's the felling axe, the double bit axe, the splitting maul, the hatchet, the tomahawk, pickaxe, battle axe, carving axe. All of these made to suit their purpose, tenderly, gently crafted. If you have something to cleave, something to cut into two, then there is likely just to be an axe for you. We used to say that there is a knife for all occasions, but you wouldn't bring a knife to an axe fight. The axe is the thing. We used to joke that an axe is used to nap the night from the day, to shred the sea from the beach. An axe splinters seconds out of time, blink nicked from blink, good brutalised from bad, sense slashed from sound. The steel runs through it, and the two sides of the argument can no longer be reconciled. A separation, a breach, the valleys in the palm and the canyons in the heart, all made by an axe. That which is and could be by the same blunt blade, noun scraped from verb, left lost from right, thing from non-thing, Jack Nicholson grinning from a tent from a rent in continuity, Lizzie Borden divvying up the difference between this and that. When you look into the past, you'll see the canopies of memory, green, majestic and ancient, and the sound of an axe, chop, chop, laying them down one by one. Oh, axe, 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 rive, groove and shrive me, break, crack and snap me, cut me out of the unbreathing sleep, breach the umbilicus of connection. If we move, if we progress through the soft purpose of the world, it is because we are an axe. An axe. I'd ask why we must let go. I would ask why the pear must go down to the bone. The core must be taken from the apple. Why you will one day be taken from me. Why the woodcutter comes whistling out of the forest with the pelt of a wolf. Why we only get one half of an echo. I would ask, 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 and the edge of the axe will answer. Okay. Genuinely my first time looking at that poem. It's probably slightly longer than what you'd get in the exam, although I could see it being that sort of length. And I think I'm going to go back to now analyse this poem, slightly panicking, slightly empathising with you in terms of what you have to do every day. And I think the first thing that I would probably do in the first 5 minutes before I do anything in terms of analysing this poem is to kind of get a sense of what I think it's about. And I think one really instructive thing to do here is with Unseen Poetry is that every poem kind of sets its own rules for itself. I don't know if that's a sentence that makes any sense to you, but I think one of the hard things about Unseen Poetry is what you have to do is you have to kind of explain what rules that poem has set up for itself in terms of your engagement with it or your understanding of it. What is this poem kind of suggesting? So the first thing obviously that I'm going to think about is like that the most obvious kind of things that jump out to me is the repetition of that title. It's a one word like monosyllabic title, axe, and we've got the word axe repeated again and again and again throughout the poem. Might be an obvious thing to say, but it's so obvious that that is the first signal that the poem is giving me about what's important about it. And I think probably with Unseen Poetry, it's worth at the beginning not overthinking too much and just going with what is the biggest signal that this poem is giving to me about what it means. So probably the first sorts of notes that I would be putting down is that idea of the repetition of axe. What is that asking me to do? Well, I think that's asking me to think about what an axe is. And this is where it's kind of asking you to think about maybe some bigger meanings of things like that. So I think with that repetition of axe, you've got a kind of simple violence, haven't you? The thing that axe suggests most of all, as the poem tells us, is the kind of violent chopping motion. So you've got the simple violence, the breaking of things into two or into halves. But I suppose with the idea of with an axe, you've also got the idea of a tool, and maybe an ancient tool. So if this poem is calling itself axe, and it's repeating the word axe over and over again, that simple three-letter monosyllabic word, it wants me to think about what an axe is, doesn't it? And so it might want me to start thinking about, well, what does it mean to me? What are the associations? And you've got the violence and breaking versus the ancient tool. This is where Blake helps us, because Blake believes, doesn't he, that without contraries there are no progression. Blake believes that all of the energy of everything comes from the clashing of contraries. And I think what we might do is use that. We've got a clashing of contraries within the word axe, haven't we? We've got the idea that it's something that we might fear. It's something that may hurt us. Or it's something that might be a tool for our survival. So an axe in itself is this splitting into two of something that can hurt us and kill us and chop us up or make us into these kind of monstrous violent creatures, but also something that is integral to kind of human development and always has been since kind of prehistoric times, and is something that we need in order to kind of survive. So just with that idea of the word axe and the repetition of axe, I think we've got this idea that this might be a poem about the tension between survival and violence. So now I've thought about it, what I would probably do if I was in the exam is I would read the poem again. So I'm not going to literally read the poem out loud to you again. But once I'd got that idea of like, what is the most obvious thing the poem is telling me, I'm going to read the poem again and start then looking for the other things that the poem seems to be signalling. As I read it the first time, I was thinking about some of these things. And this point now is where the response becomes yours, because this poem's long enough that different people would probably pick out different things that that kind of stood out to them about the poem, and therefore build different arguments about it. But I think the first little alarm bell for me when I started reading the poem was tenderly, gently crafted. I think there's something there about the unexpected use of those words tenderly and gently in a poem that is telling you so hard that this is a poem about chopping and violence and the axe. So I think probably the first thing that I'd question, or the first thing that I'd put down, is that idea of tenderly, gently crafted. And that kind of goes with this idea that the axe is more than just one thing. I think the other thing that I started spotting on my first reading of the poem was the way that at times the axe's job is being described in a very ordinary way, doing the things you would expect an axe to do. But sometimes the axe is doing things that are kind of almost like cosmic or unreal. You know, the future is kindling is one, I think. Earth balances on the wedge of an axe and its weight presses down. But especially, we used to joke that an axe is used to nap the night from the day, to shred the sea from the beach, an axe splinters seconds out of time. I think that's the other bit that I would pick out and talk about the kind of cosmic claims that are being made about the usefulness of the axe. The axe is not just this tool, but the idea of the axe is something that is fundamental to how the world works. Even if that's just a joke, even if, like, I think we used to joke, is this writer O'Brien suggesting that he knows that it's not true that an axe naps the night from the day. It's not true that an axe shreds the sea from the beach. But maybe it's integral to our understanding of the world. Maybe our understanding of the world, because as humans, the axe has been kind of so fundamental to our kind of development. Maybe we see the world in terms of this splintering. So I'm going to write that down for myself. We see the world in terms of splintering. And I'm just looking at time, and I reckon I've spent about coming up to 10 minutes thinking about this poem. And if you have a look at what I've got there, it's not very close to an essay, is it? And you only have 40 minutes to write it. So I think what I'll do now is maybe just have a look at kind of something else that I find in the poem, and then start trying to build an argument from that. So another really key lesson that we might do here is, especially with a longer poem, try and be confident enough, once you've read the poem, you've got an idea, to maybe just pick out the bits of the poem that are useful to you. Don't feel the need to explain every single line of this poem in order. I think sometimes that makes for bad unseen poetry work. And I think the other interesting bit of the poem comes towards the end, where he starts talking to the axe and asking the axe to do things to him. Right? Oh, axe, axe, rive, groove and shrive me, break, crack and snap me, cut me out of the unbreathing speech, breach the umbilicus of connection. Like, that's interesting, isn't it? So again, maybe we'll make the point here that, like, towards the end of the poem, the axe becomes this thing that, I mean, that oh axe feels a little bit like an address or a prayer, doesn't it? Like he's kind of asking the axe to do things. Groove and shrive me. Shrive is a religious word about confession, isn't it? So there is the kind of almost like religious language that comes into the end of the poem. So I would probably talk about that. If I had time, I'd also maybe talk about the ending of the poem, which turns into these questions about why the world is the way it is. But I might have run out of time for that. So I think I've got kind of 3 points here, and I would then have about half an hour to write my answer. So the thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to just do a very, very brief plan, and this is me thinking again in the exam. My introduction would be to set out an overall view of the poem, which is that kind of the axe being the axe is being presented as this symbol of violence and of breaking things into two. And I'm going to write maybe 4 or 5 sentences of an introduction where I do that. My first point is going to be about kind of the duality in the presentation of the axe, right? O'Brien is suggesting that axe is both our kind of lifeline and also our threat. And in that paragraph, I'm going to talk about that tenderly and gently being contrasted with the kind of regular violent imagery listing about the axe. I think I can get a paragraph out of that where I say that, I'm saying what is this telling us about the idea of the axe. Point number 2, the poem uses this idea, the axe splitting things, to comment on our view of how the world works in a bigger, more cosmic sense. Our use of the axe has made us see the world in terms of binaries and splits. And there we've got the kind of, we see the world in terms of splintering, that thing about the splinter seconds out of time. And I'll probably talk about that idea of the word joke being used to kind of distance from this idea of like superstition. And then probably point 3, the poem ends with a kind of praying to or worship or questioning of the meaning of the axe directly addresses the axe, and that kind of asking the axe to act upon the speaker. I suppose if we're linking that to point 2, it's almost kind of like saying that we are the axe and the violence and the tool thing is so fundamental to humanity that the axe is kind of a kind of God to us, and that all of the things that we want from God we can get from the concept of this axe. The axe will kind of like purify us and but snap us and cut us up and breach us. So I think what I've got within probably about 15 minutes, maybe, since I started, is an essay plan there. And then I would probably be trying to write as quickly as I could, where I went into kind of making these points and then going into the poem to look for kind of specific terminology and stuff like that. I think one thing that I could talk about, but I don't know if I would, is the kind of shape of this poem, the big block of the poem. You don't have to talk about things like structure, but I think the kind of listing and the kind of the kind of big rectangular shape of the poem might give you a sense of this thing that's ready to be chopped. I don't know, something like that. But I don't know if I would end up putting that in my essay, and I wouldn't have to if I felt that it didn't really back up my idea. But as I said at the beginning, poems are often there to kind of tell you in terms of what to read of them, and looking at structure might help you to do that. So I think you could probably get away with looking at the structure of the poem as well and talking about that. I'd maybe do like the idea that this poem is a big block ready to be chopped, because that fits in with what we were saying about the axe. So I think what I'll do is, rather than do this on the video, I will have a go at writing my introduction up from that, and then maybe writing one or more of these points, so that when I share the video, you can have a read of what I've actually written. But I think what I've probably also demonstrated in there is you've got to think quite quickly, haven't you? You've got to make some decisions, and I think one of the good things about unseen poetry, or one of the tips that I'd give to you, is know what to ignore. Like, you've got 40 minutes. If you get a poem anything like this length, there is going to be no expectation that you talk about every moment. I didn't talk about Jack Nicholson or Lizzie Borden here, did I? Or this middle bit of the poem. Not that it wouldn't have been rich for interpretation, but I just didn't. It just wasn't the vibe when I looked at it. Sorry for that use of language, that age inappropriate language, but that was kind of what my thinking there. So hopefully that makes sense, and I'm then going to give you a little bit of a challenge. I will write about axe, because I don't think there's much point about in you watching this video and then you writing a kind of response to axe. However, what I'm going to suggest that you do, and I'll get rid of the Poetry Societies thing. Actually, I won't get rid of the Poetry Society thing. If you have a look at the National Poetry, it's poetrysociety.org. I'll put the link in the chat when I share this. Poetrysociety.org. You can look at the last few years of poetry winners. I also didn't read the third prize by Zoe Dorado, badminton. That's probably one to look at. And all down the side, you've got the kind of commended poems. Goes right back to the 1970s, the National Poetry Competition. So you can look at, all of the old kind of winners, if that loads. Yeah, presumably it does. So I would say go and look at the top 3 poems for the last kind of, 45 years, if you want to do that, and pick a poem at random to do that with. Another option is the Poetry Foundation, poetryfoundation.org, and I'll put that in the chat as well on Teams. They have a poem of the day. So here's Tree by Jane Hirschfield. You can click that. It's a very short poem. You might get a longer poem like that in your exam, but you could look at whatever poem of the day is on the Poetry Foundation, and there you've immediately got some material to do what I've just done. Read it for the very first time. Ask yourself what that poem is telling you to look at, and make as quickly as you can a kind of overall response of something that you might say, looking at kind of maybe 3 moments across the poem. I'm going to leave it there, and hopefully that was useful. Thanks very much.